This is an audio recording of Richard Halliburton's Book of Marvels, The Occident, Chapter 4, The Deepest Canyon. Did you ever hear the story of the 7 cities of Cibola? It is an old legend that has been told in Spain for 1,000 years. 1,000 years ago, the Moors, crossing the Straits of Gibraltar from Africa, conquered Spain and made it part of their great Muslim empire. Many Christians fled from the country, among them a Catholic bishop and his followers, who sought refuge, so the legend says, in a land far to the west, across the Sea of Darkness. There, these refugees founded 7 cities, called the 7 Cities of Cibola, which became, as the legend improved with the telling, the richest cities in the world. And so, when Columbus discovered America, people were sure this new India was really Cibola, to which the bishop had fled 500 years before, and that the 7 cities would soon be located. In fact, the early gold-hungry Spanish explorers marched thousands of miles and endured great hardships looking for them. From Mexico in 1539, the Spanish viceroy sent an expedition into what is now New Mexico, still hoping to locate the gold of Cibola. Indians assured the explorers that 7 large cities would be found 30 days' march to the north. Undoubtedly, thought the Spaniards, these are the very goals we are seeking. Soon we'll all be rich. They hurried on. To explore the trail in advance, the captain sent ahead a Spanish scout along with an Indian guide. And sure enough, the scout did find 7 cities, only to be killed by the inhabitants. But the Indian guide escaped and fled back to his on-marching comrades with the story that Cibola had indeed been found, but could not be taken without an army. The captain rushed to Mexico to report. Promptly, the viceroy dispatched the great explorer, Coronado, to go and seize the cities and all their gold. Coronado, overcoming great hardships, reached the land which the Indian guide had said was Cibola. But all the Spaniards found were 7 poverty-stricken Indian pueblos, not far from the present site of Gallup, New Mexico. The Indian inhabitants, probably to get rid of him, told Coronado that if it was gold he wanted, he'd find it to the west, and a great and wonderful river, too, a river that flowed deep in the earth between gold walls. And so Coronado, excited by this new tall tale, sent one of his officers named Don Lopez de Cardenas with 12 men to investigate. Cardenas marched west, mile after mile, across burning, bright-colored deserts and over barren mountains. He and his men were scorched by the sun. They grew desperate from thirst. How they prayed for the sight of that river. Whether or not it had gold walls didn't matter, if only it had water. But the desert rolled on. Then, as unexpectedly as a clap of thunder on a sunny day, they came upon it. The Grand Canyon of the Colorado, the deepest, the widest, the vastest, the most marvelous canyon in the world. Cardenas and his men stood and looked at each other, silent, on the brink of the abyss. This was in 1540, 80 long years before the Pilgrims came to America in the Mayflower. The walls, a mile deep, were not made of gold, as the Indians had said, but of rock that in places looked like gold and shone like gold. And along with the yellow shades were bands of red and blue and green, all swimming in a lilac mist. The Spanish historian who wrote the narrative of this famous expedition tells us more about it. Cardenas and his 12 men spent 3 days on the rim looking for a passage down to the river. From above, the river looked no more than 6 feet across, though the Indians said it was 50 times that wide. 3 of the men made an attempt to descend at the least difficult place, but soon returned and said it was impossible to go more than 1/3 of the way, so steep were the cliffs. Those who stayed above had thought that some rocks on the sides of the cliffs seemed about as tall as a man, But those who went down swore that when they reached those rocks, they were bigger than the great cathedral tower of Seville. It's this gash in the Earth's crust we are going to visit next on our quest for marvels. All of us have read stories and seen pictures of the Grand Canyon. These do not help us understand what the canyon is really like. It's as if we tried to understand music just from reading about it, or from seeing pictures of a piano and a violin. The canyon may look even rather dull in photographs. But when you see the real thing with your own eyes, the sight strikes you speechless. That mile drop to the river, that 10-mile void across to the other brink, those color-splashed temples and towers and pyramids of rock that swell up from the terraced walls, that yawning sea of painted splendor falling away into bottomless mysteries. The Grand Canyon is too huge for us to measure by any scale we know. I'm sure it must have been intended originally for the great planet Jupiter or for Saturn and got shipped to our little globe by mistake. But by whatever chance it came to be here, the first sight of the canyon, when the sunset is filling it with burning glory, or the moon with dark enchantment, is enough to overwhelm the most hardened traveler that ever lived. But I believe I just said that writing about the Grand Canyon was a waste of time. Let's have a look at it. Like Cardenas's men, we must travel for miles across a high and barren plateau to reach the canyon. And like Cardenas, we come upon it all at once. Strange, isn't it, how we too stand silent? There's nothing to say. Nothing we could say would mean anything. A guide tells us how deep the great chasm is and how wide and how long. We don't listen. We don't want to listen. All we want is wings. Instead, we have to accept donkeys in order to explore the abyss. Riding these patient little beasts, we start to descend the trail toward the Colorado River, 5,000 feet below. The trail twists and zigzags down the cliffs, and on every side of us the painted rock temples rear up their wind-sculptured domes and pinnacles. These temples have taken 10 million years to build. All these years, the river has been grinding its channel deeper into the plateau, and the rainstorms and the winds have been carving into the rugged banks on either side. The weather was cold at the 7,000-foot rim. Now, halfway down, it's warm, and at the bottom it's sweltering. The temperature has risen 50 degrees. For the walls, soaring 3, 4, 5,000 feet above us, are close together here at the bottom and reflect the heat. We'd like to go for a swim and cool off, but the river roars past with its cargo of rocks and sand and mud, making a hideous din. And this onrushing flood, thick as liquid cement, is 300 feet wide, not 6 feet as Cardenas estimated. In it, a swimmer would be crushed to death. And yet people have navigated this angry river from end to end in tough little boats and, struggling along in the muddy flood, raced past this very spot. The first and most famous of all the river conquerors was Major Powell of the United States Army. The date of his exploit was 1869. This canyon fascinated him. He wanted to explore and study every inch of it. Perhaps he might find a way to harness and control the treacherous stream. Though he had only one arm, having lost the other in the Civil War, he resolved to launch a boat in the headwaters of the river and travel down the entire length of the canyon. Everybody tried to persuade him not to go. Trappers, looking from the rim, had noticed places where the river took great leaps to lower levels. The Indians assured him that the river disappeared completely at times into underground channels. They said no human being could possibly live once seized in the Colorado's savage embrace. But Powell was deaf to all warnings. With 3 boats and 9 men, he pushed off from the shore far to the north in the state of Wyoming, hundreds of miles above the canyon, on what was to be a truly heroic adventure. For 90 days, this brave little fleet floated hopefully on, right into the jaws of the terrible chasm. Through whirlpools and rapids, over waterfalls, the little boats were carried by the wild and merciless current. The roar of the water never ceased. The threat of disaster never departed. The boats were overturned. The men, with all their equipment and all their food supplies, remained water-soaked for days on end. 100 times the explorers escaped from what seemed certain death. But there could be no turning back. And who would hear them if they cried for help? The 9 men accompanying Major Powell were not all so iron-willed as their leader. 3 of them, after 12 weeks of this constant battle to keep alive, came to the end of their strength and courage. They announced that they were going to quit, that the strain was driving them crazy, that they would try to climb the mile-high cliffs and take their chances on reaching the desert above, rather than continue another foot down that murderous river towards sure death with the party. Major Powell let them go and watched them crawling up the canyon wall until they disappeared. The 3 deserters, with desperate effort, actually reached the top. They had escaped. How beautiful and friendly the flat, dry desert seemed. But their happiness was brought to an abrupt and terrible end. Indians, distrusting all white men, and believing these were only 3 more who had come to rob them, seized the exhausted and helpless deserters and put them to death. And the very day they died, Major Powell and his 6 faithful followers fought their way around a great bend in the chasm and were suddenly shot out of the south entrance of the canyon into the quiet waters of the lower river, safe. End of chapter 4 of Richard Halliburton's Book of Marvels, The Occident.